Well, you called it. That was 200 by Vincent Collins. Really quite an amazing uh, film by a psychedelic filmmaker. I am changing my text right now. Yeah, so that was part of a grant by the United States Information Agency that Vincent Collins applied for and was able to finance making this animation. This is the United States Information Agency, in case you don't know, is our propaganda branch of the government. And traditionally, there was a law that was passed that anything that was made by the United States Information Agency wasn't actually allowed to be shown in the United States. They didn't want the propaganda that they were making for the rest of the world to talk about how great the United States was. They didn't want it to be shown and affect the people in the United States, which is an interesting thing. You would think that the transparency of like, well, you know, America's great would translate to people in the United States, but I have a feeling that some of the messages in some of their works were skewed in certain ways, and lawmakers were concerned about that. Now, this particular film, I think, was because it was part of the Bicentennial Project. Whoa, went down the wrong path. Some coffee. Because of that, because it was for that Bicentennial Project, I don't think the rules applied to this. But anyways, why are we showing this? Well, this is the 200th show, as most of you have seen or have figured out. We've been doing this since mid-March. We've been doing streaming shows for a couple of years, 3 or 4 years. they were monthly shows. Initially, they were these crazy 24-hour marathons where I wouldn't sleep and I would just show films for 24 hours. I realized that was daunting. After the third time I did it, I was like, I'm not doing this again. I've already proven that I can do it. So then when the pandemic hit, I was like, all right, I should, do something every day for my own sanity. And so thank you, all of you, for tuning in and watching and giving your comments. It's really something that kind of reestablished why I do what I do. I certainly get reminders, but showing films to people is why I do, why I collect, why I buy digitizing equipment, why I buy projectors. It's one thing to actually have the film, but it's really important for me to show the film to you. So, thank you for that. That being said, I have remnants. I went to the archive last night and was like, well, what do I want to show? I don't know. I was like, what is this reel? I don't know. It's like a built-up reel that has like three films on it. So I'm just going to show it. And what it turned out to be, I looked at the first film. I think it's a show that I did called Why? And it's all films that explain why. So maybe we'll learn something during this. So this is Why. This first one is called Why Not Try? Enjoy.
The most important person in the whole wide world is you, and you hardly even know you. The most important person in the whole wide world is you. Come on, we'll show you. Let's find out more about the things you feel and do, 'cause you're the most important person in the world to you.
Boy, am I hungry.
Me too. Here you are.
What's that? I don't know. Looks pretty. Not to me.
What do you think? I don't know. I got a cold.
Smells great.
I never smelled that smell before.
Are you gonna try it? Are you?
Hey!
When you see something sitting there on your plate that you never saw sitting before, do you just let it sit without trying a bit? 'Cause it looks a little different than what you saw sitting there yesterday. Is that the way? Try it, try it, one small bite. You never know, it just might be a new food friend that you ask for again and again and again and again and again.
Come on, Fumble.
I don't know about this.
You'll never know if you don't try.
I don't think I'll like it.
Come on, try. What did you think, Fumble?
I liked it. Let's try it again.
You can do it too.
She's afraid to try.
I used to be afraid too, but it's fun. Are you afraid you can't do it? Are you afraid to get dirty? Well, what are you afraid of?
Wow, that's terrific.
It's beautiful. Where did he come from?
He's weird.
He's new. I'm not going to sit next to him.
Hello.
Are you going to sit next to me?
Sure, why not?
Nobody else wanted to.
I like meeting new people. New encounters are challenging and stimulating. Besides, everybody's new the first time you meet them.
Huh? When you see someone sitting there next to you who you never saw sitting before, do you just let him sit without trying a bit? 'Cause he looks a little different than who you saw sitting there yesterday. Is that the way? Try a smile, make it nice and bright. You never know, he just might be a brand new friend that you want to see again and again and again and again.
Nice to meet you. Oh, nice to meet you, too. Want to play with my Grobnik? What do you do with it? I don't know. Let's try to figure something out together. Okay, buddy-o.
The most important person.
Hi, Mom. Hi, Mike. Dinner's ready. I guess I'm not hungry. Why don't you try some of your chicken? Like it. You haven't even touched it. Have you been snacking again? Just a little. How many times have I talked to you about snacking? I just spent 2 hours making a meal, being sure you have all the things you should, and you spoil it with snacks. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to spoil your meal. Snacks. I mean, what difference does it make?
So this is part of that same series of why Kathy doesn't eat breakfast, but this it has a much more clear definition of why not snack. I mean, it's clear he's not eating nutritional food for dinner because he snacked all day. Whereas with Kathy, we're still trying to figure out why she wasn't eating. Also, thank you for all the institutionalized references in the comments.
A lot of demands are made about how food should be handled. It all comes under the heading of sanitation lately. But maybe you've wondered about it. Maybe now and then you've asked yourself, why all the fuss? Why all the fuss about sanitation? The main reason is public health, your health and mine. In plain English, because it's a matter of life and death. And this is what the fuss is all about. These are highly magnified germs, or if you want to get fancy about it, bacteria. Most illnesses and deaths that result from food are caused by them. They reproduce by a very simple system. They simply divide and form two germs. Under the right conditions, one germ can, in 24 hours, grow into a family numbering over 200 trillion, equal to a lineup of 10 billion inches, which is more than 6 times around the world. Now that's a lot of germs. Fortunately for human beings, the growth of bacteria can be controlled if we just get a little fussy about a few simple rules. It is important to remember how germs get from place to place. The fact is, they are hitchhikers. They are carried by people, the #1 source of germs in food. They also ride with flies, rats, and roaches. They can also hitch rides on tools and equipment, or on utensils or towels, or soiled clothing. Since people are the main carriers of germs, food handlers must be conscious of the need for cleanliness at all times. This begins with frequent bathing and clean uniforms always. Proper headgear is also a must. Careful cleaning of the hands is especially important for all food service personnel. The rules of washing after using toilet facilities are not just for good manners. The deadly hitchhikers can get on board in the restroom because they are always present wherever there are human wastes. Be sure you feel well when you come to work. The best rule to keep from contaminating food is never work when you are sick, even if it's just a cold. Step 2 in sanitation: keep the germs from growing in the food itself. Lowering the temperature doesn't kill them, but it does keep most kinds of bacteria from multiplying. A potentially hazardous food must not be held for long at room temperature. It must be served while it is still hot, or else it must be refrigerated immediately. Food that is to be held for later use must have its temperature lowered to a safe level. The food must quickly cool to a temperature of 45 degrees or below. This is not refrigerator temperature, but food temperature. Notice the shallowness of the storage pan. This is to allow the cooling to reach the very center of the food. Remember this: no matter how up-to-date your refrigerating equipment may be, It does no good at all if the food has been allowed to stay warm for a long period of time before refrigeration. This thermometer shows how various levels of heat affect bacteria. Notice the danger zone between 45 and 140 degrees. Between these moderate to warm temperatures, most disease-causing bacteria multiply very rapidly. However, above 165 degrees, bacteria are killed. Temperatures in the kitchen and other food preparation and service spaces are ideal for the rapid growth of bacteria. The more a food is handled, the more danger there is of contamination by germs on hands, clothing, or tools. Handle food with utensils whenever possible, but make sure they are clean. The longer a food stays warm, the more danger of bacteria multiplying. Heating food reduces the danger, but the heat must be sufficient to completely kill bacteria. An internal food temperature of 165 degrees Fahrenheit is generally considered a safe standard. However, heat alone cannot do the job of sanitizing food if it has been too deeply contaminated. This drawing shows why. Colonies of bacteria sometimes create poison in the foods they feed on. The dark area is the poisoned food. Notice that the temperature of 165 degrees kills the bacteria all right, but it does not destroy the poison. Some of these poisons are heat stable. They can even survive temperatures as high as 212 degrees. This is why prompt and adequate refrigeration is an absolute necessity. Once the bacteria have gotten in, have multiplied and created their poisons, it is too late. In storage, preparation, and service, get foods out of the danger zone as quickly as possible. Remember the deadly hitchhikers. They will help you to understand why there are rules about washing and cleaning up, rules that may sometimes seem fussy. Because germs are no laughing matter. They can and do cause illness and sometimes death. Millions of people eat foods prepared in commercial kitchens every day. That's millions of the best reasons in the world for all of us who handle food to be just a little fussier than ever.
Whoa, it just ended. No leader on the end of this. Huh. Anyways, so that was a little segment of a show that I did live called Why? And all the films had Y in the title. And I've shown some others previous times. Answering a Child's Why. Why Did the Beetle Cross the Road? I don't know, it's... I could do one about how, I could do why, I could do what. Lots of films that kind of have those in the title. For example, this next film is a what. It's What is Cloth? Enjoy.
Mrs. Adams is a whiz on a sewing machine, and it's partly because she knows her materials and how to get the most out of them. Her daughter Nancy has hurried home from school today, for she has just started her first semester of home economics, and she has asked her mother to help her learn more about clothes and cloth. What are the advantages of the different kinds of cloth? How do you distinguish between different materials? Nancy wants to make a new skirt, so her mother agreed to show her a little bit about basic fibers, yarns, and textiles. Mother has 3 samples ready to show Nancy. She wants Nancy to look at each material, to feel it, to see what differences she observes. There's wool gabardine, you've heard of that, and cotton gabardine. They are both popular fabrics for many purposes. And there's a relatively new material, rayon gabardine. How can we distinguish between these materials if they are not labeled? There are simple tests that will help us identify them. They are easy to do at home with only a candle and a simple magnifier. Take 2 threads from the wool, for example, and see what happens when they are burned. Wool smells like burned hair or feathers. Just remember, wool, which is something like animal hair, smells like hair when burned. When the ends are magnified, we can see brownish balls on the ends of the fibers. The wool ball crushes easily and just powders off, too. These 2 characteristics identify wool, the burned hair odor and the brown, easily crushed ball. And because both threads tested the same, we know the sample is all wool. We did test 2, warp and filling. How do we tell warp from filling? The warp threads are those which run the length of the fabric. The filling threads are the ones woven in across the warp, or the width of the cloth, from selvage to selvage. It is difficult to tell the warp from filling threads on a small sample, but if you look closely, you'll see that the warp threads, here running vertically, are more tightly twisted and heavier than the filling threads. Now, we'll test the warp and filling threads of this acetate rayon. When burned, its odor is sourish. Remember, this is acetate rayon, different from regenerated rayon. Burning acetate rayon forms this blacker, very shiny ball on the fibers. But the ball on the rayon fibers is hard, very hard. So it's easy to tell the difference between the acetate rayon ball and the powdery wool ball. If you heat a whole piece of acetate rayon, it melts, almost like sealing wax. That's why you must never use a hot iron on acetate rayon. Now let's test the cotton yarn. Cotton smells like burning waste paper. No black or brownish ball, though. Nothing much but scorched-looking ends. You yourself can make the simple test to distinguish wool and acetate rayon. But the results from burning cotton are the same as from 2 other fibers, linen and regenerated rayon. Mrs. Adams' book on textiles says that technical tests are needed to tell the difference between fibers of cotton, linen, and regenerated rayon. So labels on cloth are important. Now that Nancy has learned a little of how to identify materials, she is wondering which material to select for her new skirt. Her choice should depend on the use she expects to make of the skirt, and sometimes on the design. One of the outcomes about wool is its warmth. This is due to the resiliency of natural fibers. This springiness of wool makes little pockets in the finished material, and the pockets hold a layer of still air, which is a good insulator. The resiliency of wool is a result of a natural crimp in the wool fibers. This crimp also makes wool easy to twist or spin into a firm yarn. Cotton fibers have no air-trapping crimp, but the twist helps make cotton spin easily and tightly. Rayon and linen fibers, however, are so smooth that it is hard to spin them into a tight, firm yarn or thread. Tight spinning makes stronger yarn and more durable cloth. Worsted yarn is more tightly spun than woolen, so worsted fabrics like gabardine are more durable than fabrics made of the softer woolen yarns. Besides the spinning of the fibers, the weave has a lot to do with durability too. That white broadcloth is called plain weave. This is cotton broadcloth. This is a typical twill weave, the familiar blue jeans. The diagonal rib is a mark of the twill weave, a durable fabric in many materials. We have looked at plain weave and twill. The third basic weave in cloth construction is the satin weave. The warp threads always pass over more than 3 filling threads at a time, and each new filling advances more than 1 warp. The long yarns, or floats, reflect light readily. That's what gives our satin slips their smooth feel and luster. In addition to weave, the color of textiles is an important factor. And to be able to buy materials intelligently, we should know how color gets into materials. This plaid pattern is a result of weaving yarns that were dyed the various colors before they were woven. The color of each yarn is the same, from selvage to selvage. That's easy to understand. The curtains are called print. That means the original solid color of plain material was printed from roll presses like magazines. Pull out a single thread and look at it closely. You'll see several different shades or colors on each thread. That's how you can always tell a printed material from a yarn-dyed material. Yarn-dyed materials are less likely to run or bleed in laundering. It's wisest to use prints for things that won't be laundered very often. Have you ever noticed how some fabrics soil easily and others do not? Here's one reason. The soft, fuzzy finish of the flannel catches and holds dirt. Hard twill does not. The fuzziness of flannels is due to a process called napping. This will give you an idea of how it is done. The extra ends pulled up on the surface give it that fluffy, warm appearance. It looks and is warmer than the same fabric would be unnapped, because that fuzz forms an insulating layer of still air. But cotton napping will pack down with use or laundering, because cotton fibers are not as resilient as wool fibers. Remember? Great care should be taken in laundering heavily napped material to avoid packing or felting the nap. And it should never be ironed. Nancy is wondering exactly why you can't launder all materials. Why must some things go to the dry cleaner? Treated wool is very sensitive to hot water and the alkali of strong soaps. These destroy its elasticity, its springiness, and shrinking and felting occur. One wool sock got washed with cotton socks by mistake. The other was washed correctly in lukewarm water with mild soap. On the next wash day, Nancy learns that rayons wash well, but lose about half their strength when wet. Wet rayon should be handled very carefully and should be turned inside out and ironed on the wrong side to prevent iron shine. Iron temperature is very important too. We saw how excess heat melts rayon. Cotton and linen launder well. They can be washed in very hot water, and so are called the most hygienic fabrics. They can be ironed with a much hotter iron than is used on rayon. But what about the material for Nancy's skirt? Can you remember what she has learned about fibers and how to tell them apart? About yarns and how they are woven into different cloth materials? Besides color, design, and price, Nancy will think of warmth, wearability, and washability. Then she'll walk with a well-dressed air.
So yeah, to determine what your fabric is, burn it. So this was obviously made for home economics. And again, I just want to reiterate that I think everybody should be required to take home economics. because it teaches you so much. And the fact that you learn about fabrics, you learn about how to clean them, you learn about what your clothes are made out of, and also how to make and mend clothes. Just think about how much money you would have been saving in your life if you knew that information. Whereas I took 2 years taking French in high school, I don't remember a lick of French and would much rather know how to balance my checkbook, cook a well-balanced meal, and sew. I really want to know how to sew. So that maybe that's my goal in the upcoming year, is to figure out how to sew, because there's a lot of stuff I want to sew. Yeah. So this next film is, I don't know if you know this, I've been collecting, besides collecting films on every possible subject that shows up, I have been actively trying to collect films about venereal disease. And this is an interesting one in that it's less about teaching a person about venereal disease and more about teaching your teenager about venereal disease. So it's about, like, okay, parents, you need to talk about sex with your kids, specifically this disease that is being spread. Birth control has been taken care of for the most part, but now we have syphilis and gonorrhea and other illnesses that are being spread. So how do I talk to my kids about this difficult subject? So this is what this film is. And it has an awesome beginning to it. So here's talking to your teens about VD.
This leader allows the projectionist to complete adjustments before presenting the film. This voice has the same intensity and tone quality as the narration which follows.
You've got what?
How could he do something like that?
He's probably ruined himself for life now.
I hope he didn't tell anyone else. We've got to keep it quiet.
Guess we should take him to the doctor, but let's make sure he doesn't report it.
If he reports it, everyone will know. It's not our fault. Is it? Maybe you should try to talk.
I think it's too late. I really should have spoken to him sooner.
You know, he never tells us what's on his mind. He never did.
Maybe we just didn't listen.
They're talking about venereal disease. It's not a crime. It's a disease. There are thousands of scared kids like this walking around with VD. If we discuss it openly, we can cure it, even prevent it.
Well, I think we're guilty about anything that involves sexual activities. So I think we were all brought up in a generation where it was difficult to talk about normal sexual affairs, abnormal sexual affairs, surely any disease affecting the sex organs or even the organs themselves. I hope we're coming out of that dark age.
How wide and deep is the gap between generations? Listen to this group of teenagers in an unrehearsed discussion. They and Dr. Chaucer were filmed at different times and edited for this presentation.
So easy. That was really great, you know? Yeah. It's so easy. You see, you always do this easy test all the time. Sorry. Did she tell you what was Hitler's middle name? I don't know. I got that one too. And when is Laura didn't have a middle name?
Today I'd like to start out by talking about communications among yourselves and your families. And I'd like to throw out a question and see how you react to this. What are some of the differences between the way you would talk with your parents and your friends?
If you tell your friend something and you say you want it confidential, then it'll stay confidential. But not if you tell your parents. And your parents usually don't understand what you mean anyway. Or they'll say, oh, that's not important, but it is. Or to you it is.
If you tell your parents something confidentially, they'll tell it confidentially to their best friend, and they'll do the same, and it's all over town.
It always cocktail parties, you know.
Plus the fact parents don't have the same problems that we have. The kids you can talk to because they're in a lot of the same situations that you are.
Yeah.
You have no trouble, talking to them because they understand you more than your parents.
The things that I go through as a teenager now are not the same things that they went through as a teenager, and they are not able to accept what I'm going through.
One gets syphilis in the same way that one gets gonorrhea, by intimate sex organ contact.
Even if you've got young parents who are like in their 30s, they were teenagers more than 20 years ago. And
they grew up back, way back in the dark ages.
It was so long ago that, everybody tends to forget.
This has nothing to do with morals. The church and the home can still do their moralizing and should. There are some important moral aspects to this problem, but they don't do anything for the disease problem. Those things can be kept, I think, clearly separate.
They may remember, but it's not the same type of problem. I don't think it's that they've forgotten things. If you're 16 or whatever, and you come home with a straight F report card or a pretty poor report card, I mean, they're not going to tell you, well, I had report cards like this. One semester I got 3 Ds. And they're not going to say that. They're going to say, well, why can't you be like me or your father? I got straight A's.
Maybe they didn't. Or
Maybe
like Joe Schmo down the block who did better.
Yeah.
If they didn't do so well in their childhood, they may not talk about themselves to say, why don't you be like him? He got straight A's.
My grandmother shipped out all my mother's stuff to our house, and I was looking through all the report cards, and she didn't do so hot. I think that some of the things that we go through today, the same situation wouldn't have come up.
Yeah, like sex. Like now, sex is more open today. Back then it wasn't. It was taboo.
A sore on the penis, a rash, a lot of these symptoms, a discharge in a women particularly, may or may not be venereal. But these are important symptoms, and they've got to be checked. And this is why you can't treat these diseases in the drugstore. You've got to know what you have before you know what to take for it.
If I bring up drugs or alcohol or sex or anything, it's automatically assumed that the reason I'm asking is because I'm doing it. We don't we don't talk about drugs and alcohol that much in the house, but I don't think that if we ever really did get into a really deep discussion, my parents would automatically assume she's, using drugs. I don't think they would.
They seem to think that you're involved with it or that you're getting involved with it. And you can't really discuss it because if they think you're involved in it, they're going to be terribly scared and upset and everything. You can't just discuss it.
They have set morals and set values, and they expect you to take after them. And as soon as you bring up a question like something about drugs or about sex, and it doesn't fit into their morals, they get really upset and they want to know why, and you just end up getting into quite an argument or something.
A lot of times the kids will know more about it, like, say, drugs. The only thing the parents know is what they've been fed by the sheriff's office or something or other, some propaganda. And the kids know, even the kids that aren't involved, know more of what it's about than the parents do. And they know what their parents are going to say, and there's nothing really to discuss.
Well, I'd like to see BD education fitted into a more general program of thorough health and sex education so that it isn't just thrown in cold, but is understood deeply and thoroughly by all kids going through school, and starting at very early ages, perhaps early junior high or before.
Where my mother would read something in a local newspaper and she'd say, oh, well, here's this Eagle Scout who went off and took LSD and then he killed his sister and now he's in a mental institution. What do you think of that? Oh, those drugs are terrible. They ought to shoot people or something. You can't help but agree with her, and then they'll walk off very satisfied and say, well, we've taught him. I mean, that's, and then what he learns in school, that'll supplement that.
They're going to assume that you're involved in it if you're older than 12. And even so, you know what they're going to say, and they know what you're going to say, and it's just going to be a rerun.
Yeah, but take something like alcohol, and suppose they have drinks also. They can't say it's definitely wrong, because they do it.
Well, kids are almost always wrong as far as parents are concerned. A lot of times, my parents and I, have fights over who's right and who's wrong, but it's not like they're totally blocking out the possibility that I'm right, because a lot of times I am, and they finally see it.
Well, my parents think that I'm too young to know anything. If we get into an argument, I'm not old enough to be smart enough. I don't have enough knowledge yet because I'm only 16.
Well, I think there's one point for the parents, because they have more experience. A lot of the things they've lived through already, so they know what happens as a result of certain things. But, which the experience is something that kids our own age do not have. And I feel that sometimes this really helps.
But I think a lot of times they really do know what's going on. We're just, I don't know, we just don't want to go to them.
But you really don't want to go to them and tell them everything that happens because you don't really want to hurt them.
As far as you're concerned, it's considered funny. But your parents take it seriously, like it's the greatest tragedy of the world. or else they don't take it seriously enough. Like, something to you could be really, really serious, and they'll just kind of brush it off as not that, serious or anything.
Gonorrhea is a discharge, it means a discharge from the gonads, from the generative organs. It's a disease that causes pain and discomfort and discharge from the generative organs of people.
If something is very important to you and it's earth-shattering, parents are kind of afraid to accept it. And if you tell them something, they won't believe it, or they just pretend that you didn't say it, and they try not to believe it. And that's something, if you tell a friend a very serious problem like that, and you tell them that you mean it, they're going to believe it and they're going to think about it, but parents are sometimes too scared of it.
I mean, your friends are objective, they can, if you have some sort of problem, you can, say this is what's happening, and, what do you think with your parents? I mean, they're emotionally involved with you, like they're worried about your welfare.
Well, in most cases with me, it depends on which kind of reaction that I feel like dealing with at the time. Whether I feel like, having people shrieking and crying and screaming in the case of my mother, or whether I'd prefer to be greeted with just a stony stare from my father. So in most cases, I just avoid talking to them at all costs.
Like, if I told my mother in confidence, then she'd tell my father, because, I don't know, well, he's included in the confidence, according to her, but, so I don't really say anything really serious to either one of my parents, but not so serious things, I'll talk to my father, because my mother just carries on for hours on end about everything.
I think it would probably have to be my father, because he's less infected with this I'm the parent and you're the child type thing. And maybe it's because of his job. My mother used to be a teacher, and he's got a different job. He can be more objective about things like that. My mother takes too much of a domineering role, and my father can really discuss things and listen to someone else's point of view and things like that. But in general, like Karen said, with a really serious problem, I wouldn't discuss it with either of them.
In the male, in the man, it's an infection of the front portion of the penis. The tube that lines the penis becomes inflamed, becomes very painful to pass urine, and there is a whitish drip at the end of the penis which indicates trouble. And in general, men go and get treatment because they're very uncomfortable.
As far as serious problems go, I don't think I can talk to either of them, but when it comes to something like, schooling or college or something that's important to me but not a serious problem, I suppose I could talk to my father better because he seems to understand more.
With women, the situation is unfortunately quite different. Can we take a look at this chart? What this is actually is a female cut in half. And I'll just show you what we're talking about so that we can describe what happens in gonorrhea. Begin with, this is the outside, and this is the inside. This is the tube through which the penis passes. This is the womb. This is the tube and ovary. This is the tube through which the urine passes. This is the bladder. This is the rectum. This is the backbone. Now, in gonorrhea, the cells lining the tubes into which the penis enters in intercourse, the birth canal, if you will, the vagina, are of a type that the gonorrhea organism does not grow well on. So that in a woman, the organism sets up its infection here in the mouth of the womb. In a man, if you remember, the infection is different. It is in the canal here that through which urine passes. This also can occur in women. The organism also can and often does in women infect the area in the rectum. In later stages of gonorrhea, this infection in the mouth of the womb, which the woman feels not at all, this is not a sensitive area, she isn't aware that she's infected, can spread up through the womb, out into the tubes and ovaries, and cause severe permanent damage to these organs, these internal organs. And all this thing is inside, way deep inside. That's the problem with gonorrhea in the female. And also, it's very hard to treat because it is so far inside.
Hey, I'd say it would have to be both, because if it was a serious matter, the first one I talked to would drag the other one in anyway. But seeing as my father isn't home all that often, I usually wind up talking to my mother, but I don't find it any easier to talk to her than my father.
I wouldn't even begin to talk to my father. there's too much conflict, you know. He hasn't really accepted me as a girl, but like one of the guys, and so we just don't talk. And my mother's national pastime is worrying, so I don't talk to her, you know. She takes everything to heart, you know.
If the infection happens to hit this little passage where urine comes, there may be burning on urination, but there may not. If it just sets up in here or in here, only in late stages does she feel deep, severe pain. But early, nothing.
Well, I feel that I could talk a lot more with my mother because she tries to be more open and subjective to my problems, where my dad has a lot more set values and does not like to deviate at all from them. Set things about, sex, premarital sex is definitely out, or anything with drugs or smoking. Alcohol's a little different. They're kind of half and half about that. But he's very, very strong against, like VD, he'd be totally against. He would he'd kick me out of the house or something. I would come up with something like that.
I think they'd probably throw me out or something. Even just discussing it is it's a forbidden subject in our house. And it's the disease itself would get them, and the way I got it would just totally, they just go bananas, and that would just totally revolt them.
It would be too much of a shock. It wouldn't be VD itself, it would be how I got it.
When she gets what is called a tubo-ovarian abscess, a real big, severe infection in the tubes and ovaries, yes, there's pain then, but that's some weeks or months after infection. All that time, she has been very infectious from this infection here in the mouth of the womb, of which she had no indication or only a very slight discharge, which for many women is essentially normal.
The last thing I'd ever do is tell anybody in my house.
I think I'd like to go to my parents. I'd like to be able to share that kind of thing with them, but I think that not only would their opinion of me change, like just at that moment, but an overall opinion, like somehow, in the future, like that was one thing that might lead to another, and their whole opinion of me would change.
When we spoke about the complexity of gonorrhea in the female, and female don't come to it, you have to get them in and tell them that they have been exposed to a male and therefore they probably have gonorrhea. If you're sure what you're dealing with, there are a number of drugs, but they vary, that are effective. One is a variety of kinds of penicillin, the other is of various types of mycin drugs. So these are potent antibiotics. They must be taken in proper quantities for proper length of time, and checks have to be made to be sure the cure was complete.
The first person, and probably the only person that I really talked to about it was, a test came up positive, would be my partner, and tell her, that she has it, and get us both, treated and dealt with.
I think the idea of the other party is very important. That's probably one of the first things that crossed my mind, because this kind of thing can travel in like a huge chain. It can involve any number of people.
I think I'd discuss it first of all with my brother, because I feel that, he's somebody that I know will keep everything confidential, but yet he knows enough that he'd be able to give me some good advice about it. And I'm sure I'd go and get it treated. And then maybe, later, like maybe a couple months later, then go and try and tell my mother, or maybe even both my parents, but I would never tell them before.
To the male, if the infection is allowed to go for too long, it causes scarring of that tube inside the penis. If that scarring in later life, as it often does, becomes severe, it causes interference with the passage of urine, a very extensive and damaging problem. It also may cause sterility in the male and chronic infection in the glands.
Number one, I wouldn't tell my parents at all, because that would totally, just wreck them. My mother would be absolutely repulsed. I think I would go tell my sister, and then she might say something like, go to a doctor, but I have like a death wish, about doctors. I'm just afraid of them, I haven't been to one in like 5 years, and nothing could make me go to one, so I'd probably just sit home and vegetate and wait till it, went away.
An ulcer, a sore, a so-called chancre, in a period of several weeks later, after that disappears, there is a rash on many parts of the body, There may be falling hair. This rash typically affects the palms and soles of the feet. Syphilis can affect every organ of the body in many, many different ways, so that one could talk for hours about the kinds of damage syphilis can cause. And syphilis causes damage over a period of many, many years. The original sores and rashes go away, but later, severe damage to bone, to muscle, to kidney, to heart, to liver, to brain, all these things can occur severely.
I would definitely get it treated, and eventually I think I'd like to tell them, but I think it would have to be either several years later or when I'm in a more secure position to be able to say, well, you know, do you remember when I was 16 years old and I got VD? And then they would be removed from it. They wouldn't have the immediate reaction. They'd, you know, be able to say, well, I'm glad, you know, it's all over with, but I wish you could have come, you know, to me then.
Is for everybody, not just for the few. Anyone can share VD with someone nice as you. VD is for everybody, darling, have no doubt that anyone can get VD. That's what it's all about.
If you're curious or confused, get information or a pamphlet at most pharmacies or a health clinic. If you need help, see a doctor.
So that was requested by a couple of people. VD is for everybody. Wonderful public service announcement made by the American Social Health Association, which used to be the American Social Hygiene Association, which now I believe is the American Sexual Health Association. I used to work for them back in the day after college for a couple of years working at the National AIDS Hotline, which is what they ran. And that's when I started collecting VD films. I was already collecting films at the time, but learning about the history of ASHA, they put out the first VD film in 1918 called Fit to Fight. And sadly, that film no longer exists, but it was scandalous at the time because it actually mentioned the terms gonorrhea and syphilis, which was considered obscene and deemed illegal in New York City. So thanks everybody for tuning in today. Thank you, Ross, for some coffee. I love coffee, and that's a quick and easy way to reward AV Geeks, or punish AV Geeks, it depends on how you want to look at it, for doing these daily screening shows. Very much enjoy this time, and I'll just keep doing it. I don't know. At some point I might say, like, all right, my life is getting back to normal, but this is becoming the new normal, so I'll keep showing films if you guys keep putting your eyes on them and talking about them. So ways you can support us besides buying us coffee is you can hit like or subscribe or follow. You can also just tell people about what we're doing and share the links and say, like, hey, here's that guy again showing those films again. It's 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, so it's pretty much, you know, I'll be here most weekdays. Another way is to go to avgeeks.com. I have lots of previous shows there, and I have thousands of films that I've digitized in the past online there. And so if there's a film that you were looking for, it might be something that exists on there. But thank you so much. It means a great deal to have you guys kind of tune in every day. It's like I was saying yesterday, it's like a hanging out at the table, the lunchtime crowd in the cafeteria, but it's 30 or 40 of you, so it would be a very long table. But it's one of the things that I feel like has been a great part of this whole pandemic is the fact that I can share these with you and I can make time to share these with you. So thanks again. And we'll be back tomorrow, 1 o'clock, for show 201. Yeah, plenty more where that came from. Thanks again, everybody. As always, love each other, please rewind, and smiley face with eyelashes. So everybody take care. We'll see you tomorrow.